Hey, everybody, it's Doug Green, and I'm the publisher of Technology Reseller News. And I'm very pleased to have with me today my good friend, Andy Abramson of Comunicano. Andy, thank you for joining me today.
Doug, it's a pleasure to be with you as always.
So, I don't even know how to introduce you. I mean, I hope everybody knows who you are, and I hope that people know about Comunicano and your newsletter, about the information you make available on LinkedIn and other places. But Andy, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background for folks that don't know and what you're doing?
Serial marketer communications. I've been in this world since I was 14. Pro sports for half of my life at one point. From the time I was 14, I was 38 or 28. And then all the way up until the time I was 38, I was involved either in and around pro sports, working for 3 teams, working in sports marketing for the Upper Deck Company, leading sports marketing for a division of Footcomb Belding. So I've been in marketing all my life, and somewhere along the way, I made a right turn into technology, probably about 1995, 96. I'd been online since 1980, 81 when I had my very first computer. It was an Osborne. So whatever week the Osborne came out, the modem came along with it. And I was online using CompuServe and the Source, and then many other online services. So I've been online. I've been into the whole idea of the internet since before the internet was the web. So I'm kind of a pioneer in that area. Comunicano specializes in value creation communications. We must be doing things right because we've exited some 60 companies that we've been involved with, either end to end, maybe at the middle, maybe at the beginning, maybe at the end, or a combination of those. Sometimes we get brought in early, we get brought back in to push them over the line. $9.4 billion in real money returned back to the founders, the executives, the investors, and that's for the first 45 or 46 of them. I always tell people I'm not impressed by the numbers, not the 60, not the 9.4 billion with a B. I'm more impressed that Google bought 2, Grand Central, which is now Google Voice, GIPS, known as Global IP Solutions, which provides a lot of the underpinnings of what is today's Google Meet and a few other things that Google's doing. They were way ahead on the curve when it came to WebRTC. We also had one acquired by Yahoo. StubHub got acquired by eBay, proving it's not all telecom. 2 by Vonage, Simple Signal, Telesphere. And Cisco, I think, acquired DynamicSoft. IBM acquired Lotus. Web Dialogues became Lotus same time. Citrix acquired High Def Conferencing, which is the underpinnings today of GoToMeeting, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. So we really work to build value in companies through the storyline, the architecture of identity, helping companies tell their story the right way, because every story is made up of 3 parts: your story, your legend, your backstory. And then we figure out how to communicate it using an approach called the Boulevard of Communication. So a lot of exits along the way. Some people might know more recently Phonative and SkySwitch were 2 of the more recent tech exits. I was CMO of both companies at the same time, ironically, because one of the things I do is a fractional CMO. So, Doug, we've known each other, I don't know how many years and how
30.
many.
It must be 20 or 30 years.
20 or 30 years. And there's a lot of podcasts we've done together and quite a few others that people I know have been able to talk to you about.
Well, and then I want to point out something else, because we sort of talked about it right at the beginning. With all that technology background and the marketing background, you have retained sports and broadcasting and marketing outside of technology as an insight. In other words, I think you've always been able to bring, those industries, especially sports, is particularly good at also reaching out to audiences beyond maybe core fans. The core fans will watch the game no matter what's happening, right? They'll just turn a camera on, they'll watch. But the proliferation of sports television, sports broadcasting, sports streaming, and so on has a lot to do with actually marketing sports to people that aren't necessarily core fans.
Well, when I was working for the Philadelphia Flyers, I was the employee 1A. So my boss and I were hired at the same time, but he's a little older, so I gave him credit of being employee number 1. We launched the first ever professional sports fan development organization, which is a big claim. But when you look back, to 1976 and realized I had just turned, I think, 16 when I got hired, maybe 17. It was quite an accomplishment of what we did. And then I ran the organization for the next 12 years after he stepped aside to open up a casino in Atlantic City as the head of comms there. But like in 1978, I was hosting high school hockey games on the radio. In 1979, I was doing the Pepsi shootout between periods of the Flyers games, but I had already been filing radio reports since 1974. So when you look at it now, 60 years later, 50 years later, it's broadcasting has been part of my blood. I remember talking to radio stations from the press box in Montreal, one of the greatest press boxes in pro sports at the Montreal Forum, and filing other reports from places like Long Island and Baltimore, Maryland area, the Capitol Center, which was on the Beltway between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, as well as from the Spectrum in Philadelphia. So broadcasting, and then Ken Rakowski and I had the good fortune to be some of the earliest pioneers of podcasting. As a matter of fact, we were doing the World Technology Roundup from 1998 to 2011, 13 years. It was before the word podcasting came along. We were streaming. And we had 300,000 daily download listeners, not 300,000 maybes, because you actually had to click to download the audio. And that's how we knew we had 300,000 listeners on average every day. So yeah, I've been around this a while and I still enjoy it. And sports is always part of my DNA. I think, you start working at the age of 14 and with, on the management side, not selling hot dogs or hawking tickets or T-shirts. And it becomes part of your blood. I often will use sports metaphors in discussions. And one of my favorites is, I am not a team, and it's great to be part of a team and to work together with other people. And that's kind of the way we look at everything at Comunicano, is it's a team effort with our client base and with our colleagues. And then the technology, being early in 1981, having that Osborne, and then one of the very first compact computers when it came out. I'd already had my order in and bought it and got it the first day from Jonathan's Computers. And the CFO of the Flyers and I kind of had this funny thing going. He said, you buy a compact, I'll buy a PC. And if we can prove at the end of the season that they're meaningful, the company will buy them. And that happened. And then a couple of years later, I became the head of the computer group within Spectacor because I knew more about it. I just, I knew how to use WordPerfect and Multimate and what was the other one? WordStar. Those were the word processors. They're gone. They don't even exist anymore. And spreadsheets like Lotus 123. Other people were using VisiCalc. I was using Lotus 123. And I think it was Lotus 123 that really changed the game inside the Flyers accounting department. But what really made the decision that we needed computers or personal computers was I was using a service called MCI Mail, which was an email platform, but it also did one thing that was really incredible. It would emulate a Telex or a Twix, if you remember what those are. And we were on either a 300 baud or a 1200 baud modem at the time. And Don Patton was our CFO, and he was very smart. And he realized, he said, Andy, you're telling me we can get Twixes on that account? I said, yeah, at 1200 baud. And he goes, the Twix only runs at 110, which means the information will be in our computer faster than it can be printed out on the teletype. Well, that meant we would get the information about the waiver wire faster. And that's what sealed the deal. We put compacts and IBMs on everybody's desk, most importantly on Jane Coopersmith's desk, who was the executive assistant to the general manager at the time, Keith Allen, and then Bobby Clark. So, no, actually, then Diana Taylor replaced her. But we did this, and when I look back, 40 years ago at what was going on, I look at where we are today with technology. A lot has changed, and yet in some cases, like the Led Zeppelin song goes, the song remains the same.
Well, so yeah, let's connect all this tissue, because it seems that with marketing and the clients you deal with and so on, the first thing is not to go out there, but to figure out what you are and who you are and so on. And we had an earlier discussion about our podcast today, and I think you had a very interesting insight about last week's Apple announcement and about how Apple is defining itself.
So Apple is a global company, and we all have our iPhones no matter where we are around the world. And it's one operating system, except in China, where the Chinese government insists on certain things. And then Russia, the App Store is a little different in Russia than it is here because, let's face it, they're both totalitarian countries, whereas we are a republic here, or a democracy. We'll find out after tomorrow, I guess, what we are. But the reality is that when Apple announced as part of operating system 18.2 in iOS that they were creating a whole new world worldwide for default applications, I looked at this and said, for voice and messaging, wow, changes the game. Now, those of you who are in Europe, you're very familiar with what's called the Digital Services Act, which the European Union has put into play, which meant Apple had to open up the voice and messaging, the dialing and the texting, so to speak, to all applications, not just your carrier interface through the little icon down the bottom that looks like a handset. They got to get rid of that because nobody even remembers what those are. And then the same thing for text messaging. Well, if you're Apple, you really don't want to have one thing over in Europe, another thing in Asia, another thing in Oceania, and another thing in the North American and South American hemispheres. So they said, we'll do it for everything. Now, voice and messaging today, because you could already do it for your email application as well as your browser. But what else is going to come along? Probably maps and a few other things. But when I saw this, I texted my good friend Jeff Pulver and I said, this is big. And Jeff goes, yeah. And I posted a couple of posts up on LinkedIn and on my own blog at andyabramson.com because it changes the game. It's like a power play for the voice over IP UCaaS providers, because it means now companies like Dialpad, RingCentral, 8x8, Vonage, SkySwitch, Crescendo, any of them with their mobile application can become the default carrier for voice as well as text. And I'll break it down into 5 areas. One, it's all about competition and opportunity. Now, the voice over IP providers, the UCaaS providers, can compete directly with Apple's native apps of phone and FaceTime and messages, iMessages, It's opening up all kinds of opportunities for everybody. Skype and Google Voice, even WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, you name it, Line 2, anything that's been a second line on your smartphone becomes a primary line replacement completely. But what it also does is it really throws a dagger into Microsoft Teams for Verizon, that they did this big multi-million-dollar integration to make it part of the native dialer. Cisco did the same thing with AT&T. And I remember talking with Craig Walker at Dialpad a few months ago. He goes, we don't need it. Not that he had a crystal ball, just that the belief after we talked to some analysts, because in all fairness, I am a Dialpad shareholder and I've worked with them off and on for many years. We don't need it. People love using the app, but now it becomes the native dialer. So users who prefer their services can make those applications the default for calls and messaging, which will increase user engagement. Second area, better user experience. So the whole idea around the native dialer was, well, Microsoft and Cisco will be able to be the native dialer on the phone. No, you don't need to. Now Apple is going to make it easy in the default section to switch between their own apps to the third-party apps, and they become the default. And this is all possible because it's got the impact on things known as Call Kit and Push Kit. Now, if you're not a developer or you haven't worked in product management of a UCaaS or CPaaS company, or even any kind of VoIP company, you don't realize that everything from how the phone rings to how you make calls using those applications, how you set up things like do not disturb, everything may get integrated in a much better way. And also it'll likely not drain as much of your battery. I talked earlier about the Digital Services Act over in the EU, which I have to credit Alan Durick of Wire for bringing to everybody's attention. He was at a Von Evolution event about a year ago in New York, and he brought this up on a panel or discussion we were having up on stage, and realized it was something important. And then in London, we actually had a 5-person panel where we talked about these things. And I remember referencing how the Digital Services Act and making phone applications the default would be the same impact on smartphones, Doug, like the equal access rule from the 80s. You'll remember when every long distance carrier had to have access to your local phone system so that you could choose and not be stuck on AT&T. And look how that changed the game with Sprint and MCI and dozens of others. And then that's going to lead to market expansion, because now VoIP providers can more easily market into other regions that they couldn't work before, because the regulatory framework is going to demand a more open ecosystem. And the last two things are enhanced privacy and security considerations. You can do all kinds of things with apps like Signal that you can't do with a regular phone call, and most of it's encryption. So people who are very security conscious or very private, they're going to enjoy being able to do that. And at the end of the day, this is one big shift, to take a hockey term, a strategic shift for UCaaS and VoIP providers by becoming that default communication, I was going to say Comunicano app, communication app on your iOS devices. And we're not just talking iPhones, we're talking on everything, iPads too, and your watch.
So in a way, this is maybe a new era for UCaaS. We went through UCaaS Mach 1, then we went through, I guess, if you want, the Teams era that we've been walking through. You're now saying we're in a new time.
I think we're in a different time. I don't know if it's new, because those of us who have chosen to use a voice calling app, and hats off to Eric Lagerway from when he invented Counterpath and the X10 application back in the early 2000s. Those of us who used X10 and Bria remember, like, we had to set up everything, we had to code everything, and we had to hope it would work, and it did. Or James Tagg with TruePhone, Michael Robertson with Gizmo Project, and of course, Nicholas and Giannis with Skype. All of these apps became our own default ourselves. I don't know how many times I said, yeah, I'll call you on Skype. I'm not going to give you a phone call. I would Skype you, or Gizmo you, or make a TruePhone call. And those apps became our standard way we communicated. Some people use Messenger, some use I talk to my son on FaceTime. I talk to my friends in Europe on WhatsApp. I talk to other people on Dialpad, and there's another group on Signal, and there's another group on Telegram. But when I think about it, I can pick and choose which one's going to be my default now. And it's not going to be my phone number from T-Mobile or Verizon, because I rarely give them out. As a matter of fact, I don't get, when people want to connect with me on iMessage, it's using an email address. Much easier than a phone number. And they go, why do you do that? I go, well, women change purses. I change phone numbers. And I change phone numbers when I go international, especially because I'm going to use a local SIM card, or I'm going to use a local eSIM. And sometimes I'll just turn off my US phone numbers completely, because I don't want to have a roaming bill if I'm in the wrong place. Don't really give out those numbers. So all my text messages come in normally. So if I miss one, well, I miss one. So I think this is a big game changer. And you're going to see it unfold over the next few months as the UCaaS providers and the app developers begin to take advantage of how to make their apps the default.
I'm tempted to ask on behalf of our readers who are at the other end, the large enterprises, I immediately started thinking about. I'm sorry to dive into the weeds area, but for example, at a hospital or a large medical provider and so on, one of the issues is, doctor pulls out his iPhone and peels off a private phone call to a patient, sort of breaks a few rules and regulations right there. Do you see this change mitigating that? Do you see this as an opportunity for the UCaaS providers to come to the enterprises and say, hey, you know what? We have a unified solution for that.
Well, I think you're hitting on a very core issue of regulatory. So if we shift it from the doctor, let's take it to the stockbroker or the investment
Okay.
banker, who all of your calls are regulated by the SEC, and they have to stay on your phone, and the carrier has to support it, which means a mobile operator. But now integration will be that technology will likely allow that to happen for a UCaaS player very soon. And I know there's technology being developed that way in order to maintain it. I mean, going far back to when I was working with TruePhone, we had the call recording technology that we introduced in the 2012, 2013, I want to say, for that very purpose. So the traders and the brokers could all be tracked on their conversations. How many times have you read about a broker making side deals on their BlackBerry when they had a back in the day? BlackBerry was so popular. So I think your point about medical, absolutely, because it's going to all be HIPAA compliant. It's also going to be FINRA and SEC compliant for traders and brokers and people in the financial services and banking industry. But it's also going to allow for more advanced services. I mean, look at what we can do today with artificial intelligence and the cloud and a phone call. I get my summaries from every dial pad call. Every conference call I'm on is being recorded by Grain or TimeOS or Granola or Read AI or Fathom or whatever people are using. And you can listen in and transcribe, but also get better information, better analysis, better call detail than anything any of the mobile network operators have deployed today. They're simply not there. And when you look at what the cloud communications companies are able to do with their mobile applications and their services in the cloud, it's light years ahead of what the MNOs are doing. The MNOs are more concerned about network, infrastructure, the radio network, and the customer billing. So a lot of their work with things like AI is not customer facing. It's in the background. Whereas if you look at what the UCaaS companies are doing, whether it's Dialpad or RingCentral, 8x8, Vonage, whoever, they're putting all this advanced technology into the call experience, into the messaging experience. You can't do that with a traditional MNO.
So Andy, it occurs to me as we're talking that you could almost construct an evening in the future where someone orders a pizza, the pizza driver calls and makes a delivery. Later on, he gets into a little trouble. He gets into a little fender bender. He calls the law firm. The law firm and the accident person calls the insurance company. Tell us how this technology, how these changes impacts each stage. Let's start with the pizza maker, the pizza company.
Let's unpack this from the beginning. You ordered from Nick's Pizza. Nick's Pizza has a fleet of drivers, and rather than them using their cell phone's native phone number or phone dialer, Nick's has embedded a soft phone into their driver's application, much like what Uber connects when they connect you to them and them to you and all that. But instead, they've given the driver the ability to make calls because there's like 5 or 6 Nick's Pizzas. Sometimes drivers are closer to pizzeria number 2, so they might get told to come in and pick up more pizza there. But imagine that Nick's Pizza's phone system, and you can do all this with CPaaS technology today, is able to put the phone directory of all of their customers who have pizzas being delivered. And this driver, he's going to a new gated community and there's no security guard there. And the person didn't put their gate code in. And we all know that we want our pizza delivered piping hot. So he just simply goes into his Nick's Pizza app and he's able to call Doug Green and say, Doug, I've got your pepperoni and mushroom pizza. It's in my hot pack here. I need to get through the gate. Can you give me the code? You say, I'll do one better, and you open it. Okay, great. The gate opens. He drives to your house, and he hands you your pepperoni and mushroom pizza. It's piping hot from Nick's. And you were able to call, if you needed to track them down, you called the number 1-503-555-NICK, and it rings into the Nick shop until such time as the pizza is being delivered. And that way you're able to say, hey, Mr. Driver, where are you? I'm hungry. I got to eat my pizza. The guy says, hey, I'm on my way. So all of that gets done because of the smarts of the telephone system, the UCaaS provider, CPaaS, because they've now recognized your number, so they know how to connect it to him, bypassing the shop, as opposed to getting Susie or Mary or John at the shop, and they go, yeah, the guy left about 15 minutes ago. He'll be there right away. Now you're able to actually dial and get the driver. So anyway, the driver from Nick's hands you your pizza, you're happy, and while you're eating, he's driving to go get his next delivery, when all of a sudden he gets T-boned. Oh my gosh, his pizza truck is destroyed. He's limping. He has a headache. He's not hurt so much that he can't stand up. But the first thing he does is he hits the button and he calls, not the ambulance, his lawyer. And he calls one of the practitioners at the firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. And he gets Mr. Cheatham, who says, look, don't do anything. I'm going to dispatch an ambulance to you. You'll get x-rays and we'll deal with everything in the morning. So the driver from Nick's gets taken in. Now the lawyer starts setting up. He gets another call from the driver. I'm at the hospital. I filled out all the paperwork. Obviously, I was working. What are we going to do there? He goes, well, the first thing is we're going to notify your employer because you have a workman's compensation claim. And he's explaining everything to the patient. He says, next, I don't want you to talk to anybody until I'm there. When the police officer comes to take a report, I want you to wait until I'm there, because we want to make sure that the narrative you're telling the officer that goes into the report is what we're going to be able to use with the insurance company. And the lawyer then talks to him about, were you hit first or did you hit the other guy? He goes, oh, the guy T-boned me. Okay, now this whole time, the law firm, which has an advanced calling system as well, is transcribing, recording the call. And of course, it's also tying into the billing system, because every time the lawyer is on the phone with the client, the meter's running, as you often heard the expression when you're talking to a lawyer. So now he goes in, he's able to read the transcript. The lawyer gets to the hospital and he sees the driver, and he pulls up on his smartphone the transcript. Now, that's within the application he's using. So he's able to, he said, you told me you were driving, you had a green light, you waited 3 seconds before you entered the intersection, and wham, this guy in the Mack truck hit you, sending your pizza truck cantilevering onto the island of the expressway or the boulevard of the street. And then you got out. Obviously, you told me you were wearing your seatbelt. You were dizzy. These are all the things you told me on the call. He's reading the transcript. He's got all the notes. He was able to use his artificial intelligence application to bring up certain things, like what injuries did the person suffer? And it knows a headache, broken arm, I can't move my leg. All these are things. So now the lawyer is able to look at it and talk to him and talk to the doctor. And he says, does your back hurt? You mentioned a little stiffness when you got out. He goes, yeah, my back, my neck, da-da-da-da-da. Okay, these are all things that the lawyer learned from the transcription, from the first call to now the meeting, to now he's saying, okay, I'm going to dispatch you to see this doctor, this physical therapist, all these things we need, because we're going to need a case against the Mack truck driver. Well, each time the lawyer talks to the client, the call's being recorded, transcribed. But there's also other information that's going out from legal firms' phone system to him. Their text messages are all being logged, so everything becomes part of the record. Now, if Mr. Cheatham can't continue to handle the case for some reason. Mr. Howell picks up the case, or Mr. Dewey picks up the case, and they just pick up the file and they have all their information in front of them. When they call, they're not calling from their phone. They're calling from the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howell, and that number's being presented to the driver. The same way that when the driver would call Doug Green to say, I got your pizza right here, he's calling from 1-503-555-NICK. And that's delivering that. That way, it doesn't matter which driver it is, you know you're getting your pizza when you see that phone number show up on the caller ID. Well, by making these things default, and they're using their own applications or a UCaaS application, their application with telephony baked in, or the UCaaS company's application, everything is seamless. Everything is far less complicated because all the other information that needs to go along with it is there. Even down to the fact that when Nick was on the phone checking out where he had to go next, the data showed that he was using his Apple AirPods to take the call. He wasn't holding the phone in his hand and therefore can't be accused of violating the hands-free law when he got into the accident. So with all this extra data, everything's captured by the UCaaS company. And we have a much better outcome because, as I said to you when we were taking a break, if you think back, technology really all dates back to Star Trek and the Jetsons. That's the era we're now in.
You know, with our unfortunate pizza driver and the mishap that occurred, you know, all the applications you just mentioned could easily also fit into lots of other scenarios.
Correct.
Industrial production, all the rigmarole of getting products delivered to a factory, where they are, who delivered them, the management of a warehouse, logistics, aviation, mining, you know, and so on and so forth.
Well, let's take the lone worker, the security guard,
Okay.
towards the plant. Instead of having to use the mobile operator's phone number, the security company has developed a very comprehensive app that is three-dimensional. It knows what floor the guard's on, not just where he is, because GPS doesn't tell you whether you're on the first, second, or third floor. But using location-based services and integrating that into an app, they now know that he's on the fourth floor of the office building. And not only do they know he's on the fourth floor, they know he's in the southeast corner and he's at room 411, and they're able to track him all the way. Now, when he picks up the phone and makes a call from security companies' built-in, baked-in application, this is great for CPaaS companies as well as UCaaS companies. They know exactly where Mr. Security Guard is. They know he's at what building, they know what floor, they know which side of the floor, and it's all in real time because they're using location-based services, the same way hospitals keep track of bedpans and carts and where's the pharmacy delivery cart right now. All of that's tracked using a combination of location-based services and real-time telemetry and near-field communication and other technology because they can pinpoint it. They can triangulate right where it is. Well, they know that where the security guard. So he picks up the phone. He says, "Hey, I've got an open door somewhere here on the fourth floor at room 511." Well, they know he's at 511. He's no longer on the fourth floor. He's going to the fifth floor. And he goes, "Nobody should be here now. They've all left. This door shouldn't be open. Before I go in, send backup." So they know exactly where he is. Now, they may show him on the fourth floor, and he said the fifth floor. Well, in their training, if the guard says the wrong floor, it means he's in a situation where he can't give accurate information. So now, being the call, the device, everything, they're going, "Oh, we better notify the police. We're going to need an armed response," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lone worker is one example. And there's plenty of others, Doug, where this is going to. But now the default app for the security guard is the mobile app they've chosen to use, not the phone.
Well, I'm thinking maybe a less drastic situation than you're describing there, though exciting. Hospitality. Simply knowing where the roommates are, simply knowing which room right now is being redone, simply knowing maybe to go back to a more exciting example in maybe policing, knowing where every officer is in to the level of not just the address but the floor in the address or the corridor or there's a lot of and you going back to the issues of where someone's managing a large campus, a large hotel, a warehouse, something like that, university, knowing location and recording information. There's so many different things, and this, to sort of loop it all back to our MSP and MSSPs. I am seeing a lot of interesting things that people might be able to go out and sell.
I see that this changes what you can do with the messaging and calling app
Right.
very asymmetrically, in that it's going to change the game. It's also going to create new, imagined but not yet implemented ideas that people have had for years. But most importantly, it gives the enterprise the ability to have a finer line of control. And for example, people can't call their girlfriend when they're working. It just won't let them call that number unless you put the phone number in the system somehow and you're allowed to call your girlfriend or boyfriend because you found a way around it. People always find a way around it. But they won't be using company assets for personal calling. They won't be using it for personal messaging. They'll also have a deeper record. When you add in things like the blockchain and the immutable record and how all of this stuff can be kept using distributed hash tables and things like that, the data that goes along with the call can be much richer. It can be an enriched calling experience. So we could be looking at things like enriched calling, not Rich Tarani calling, but enriched calling.
Hi,
And
Rich.
yeah, but we always like to shout out to our friends. The idea here is that you're going to be able to do more things with the new default calling and messaging app than you ever did before. And this caught a lot of people off guard. I don't think the MNOs or even some of the North American based UCaaS and CPaaS companies saw this coming. So we're still in the early days, and I'm sure in a couple of months' time, we'll start to see things rolling out. And probably by the time you and I are in Fort Lauderdale for IT Expo in February, there will be something to talk about because this is what everybody's going to be saying.
Well, Andy, I really want to thank you for joining me today. This has been really interesting. That's to say the least. And I want to tell everybody, if you get on board the Comunicano Express, this is the type of stuff you get to read about almost every day, basically.
So I do a daily newsletter. It's called The Comunicano. You can send me an email at ceo@comunicano.com, or just go to comunicano.substack.com. So it's COMUNICANO.SUBSTACK.com. And you can sign up. And if you want to, you can even send me a little gift.
Well, and that's another point. It's sort of it's not a newsletter, it's a community.
It is a community, and it's really interesting. Like today, my old friend Michael Robertson, who I'll give him a shout out, he's launching a new website for webinars. It's a webinar listing service. I think it's called meetings.tv or something like that. But he's launching it, and that wasn't why he reached out to me. We're having a back and forth discussion about the music industry. But it is a community, and what's great about it is probably the first 250 people who are on the newsletter list, I know them all. Now it's starting to grow because people are saying you need to read the Comunicano, and that's what it's called, the Comunicano. And it's anywhere from 8 stories to 24 a day. It depends how much I find. And it's all hand curated. There's no AI in picking the stories. So that much I'll say. There is some AI in maybe the image or a few other things, but at the end of the day, AI is like air and water, and I'm drinking it and inhaling it like a fire hose.
So it's not an AI version of Andy, it's Andy on AI.
No, that's called Andy Intelligence.
All right, Andy Intelligence. And on that note, Andy, thanks very much. I'm going to see you next time, but thank
See
you
you
for
soon,
now.
Doug. Thank you.